What's up, y'all? Today I wanted to make a video that's not really politically related. It's more just kind of psychology and introspection stuff that I think about, on a somewhat regular basis. So the kind of question that I want to tackle in this video is, am I authentic or am I just an asshole? Which is something that I've been thinking about more lately. Something that I've thought about for a while, but I think when I got to college, I really started to kind of question it more, which is partially because I think it was just a very new environment, and I was around like huge, vast amounts of students and all these new personalities and people, many of whom, from my perspective, were not genuine. And so I guess the challenge became, remaining authentic and remaining true to yourself when you feel like you are surrounded by people who are not operating in that same way, which might sound a little conceited, but that's another kind of component of this that I'll talk about. But lately I've been really thinking about it more because of my social media hiatus, basically, which I'm still on YouTube, so it's like you could argue it's a semi-social media hiatus. I kind of talked about in my first video that I posted like 3 months ago, that the thing about YouTube is there's no notifications, so it's not the same dopamine rush as social media, which is the thing that makes you addicted to it and the thing that makes it comparable to gambling. So since YouTube doesn't have that aspect to it, I feel like a little safer using it. There's also long form discussions. That being said, there's still a lot of toxicity on YouTube. Anyways, so my point being, this whole social media hiatus has prompted me to think more about am I really being authentic, genuine version of myself, or am I being a condescending jerk, basically? Because it's I want to have these conversations, about basically the merits of social media, should we be using it, and really have critical kind of dialogues about the way we use social media and the way it impacts society. But it's you want to do that without being condescending, without being oh, I'm on this upper echelon of intelligence and maturity. You guys are all still using social media. You peasants will never be on my level. It's very easy to come off like that when you're yeah, I haven't used social media in 2 months. People are cool, dude. It's not an end all be all. You've got a lot to prove still. But yeah, so that's sort of it's kind of balancing that when you have those conversations. Because I think something I've observed is that authenticity is intimidating, even to myself at times. I find myself being intimidated by people who are highly authentic, and then you kind of got to take a step back and be why am I intimidated by this person? They're actually super genuine. That's something I've kind of noticed more as I gotten older and gotten better at being okay, this person is not, I'm not under attack here. This person's just genuine and trying to have a real conversation. That's a super important thing to realize, and it's really easy to think that you're being attacked or whatever, but yeah, so based off 40 seconds of internet research, this is certainly something that women deal with way more than men. It's not even comparable. When I Googled, so the first question I Googled is, are people intimidated by authenticity? That's kind of the one question that sort of prompted me thinking about this. And basically, 80% of the articles and links that came up were basically women explaining how people had been perceiving them as intimidating for their entire life, even though that they were just direct and honest with people. And I've talked to my female friends about this too, and they've expressed that a lot. people tell them that they're intimidating when they're just being authentic. They're just being real. And so there's a double standard. I think, like, obviously that there's a major double standard where women are expected to just not be boisterous and not speak up and curl up into a little ball and not have an opinion on anything. And when women are loud and do have opinions, people get threatened by that. And that's terrible. That's a huge part of this conversation that's really important. And so that was sort of the first thing I noticed. And but obviously it's so it's more acceptable for men to be, kind of loud and opinionated, and people perceive them often as more honest, even if they're saying the same thing that a woman may have said when they were being accused of, being bossy or something. But obviously, people can still be intimidated by dudes who are authentic too. That's real. So I think, if you're wondering what I'm looking at, I'm just kind of had to write out. Look at that. That was sideways, I know, but it's okay. But I feel really proud of this collection of thoughts here. It was kind of fun to write it on the whiteboard. You feel like a real academic. But anyways, I think so. When someone is kind of intimidated by you, they think that, like, you're not on their side, kind of like you're attacking them, essentially. When really, maybe you're just asking questions in a way that you're coming from a place that's honest and really trying to get to substantive, solutions and answers to questions within a conversation. But somebody else might perceive that as kind of like you're interrogating. And so, they feel like you're not on their side, and they also usually won't ask you any substantive questions back, because they're not actually trying to have a conversation. They're trying to defend themselves, because the way they're perceiving is it's not, it's not really it's a battle, basically. And they're no longer trying to understand your words. So when I've noticed, like, okay, this person seems intimidated right now, I just have to be like, am I being a jerk, or am I being authentic and this person is just intimidated by that? And that's kind of a difficult thing to reconcile with. And when you're kind of asking yourself that question, the important things to keep in mind are, number one, what's your intention? Why are you saying the things that you're saying? Are you saying something within the conversation to belittle the other person? Are you saying it to prove something, like, oh, I'm so genuine, I'm so smart? Like, if that's your intention, you have to be honest with yourself about that. And if that is your intention, then you are being a jerk. You're not being authentic. That's not real. So intention is super important, And then the other thing that I feel like is really, really important when you're trying to kind of interrogate yourself and be like, am I being the most authentic version of myself, is what's your tone in the conversation? I think tone totally matters. And I think, like, people who are super direct will often be like, well, I'm just being direct, I'm just being honest and crass. Like, this is just how I talk. If you can't handle it, like, I guess you're soft. And it's like, when you're on this receiving end of that, you're like, I want you to be honest with me, but also, like, the way you're talking to me is, like, is harmful, That's real. So tone is super important, and that's something that I have to remind myself of, like, okay, was I, even if what the words I was saying weren't necessarily, like, an attack in any way, I still could have said it in a tone that was super condescending, so it's like, didn't really matter what she said at all. And then the other thing that I think is important to remember is to be vulnerable, That's really, in my mind, the key to being authentic, is just be vulnerable And just don't be afraid to be seen, for who you really are, because that's all you got. And if people don't like that, screw them. You're you, and life is short. So you can't spend time trying to be who people want you to be. And the other big part of that, which I kind of noted could be its own video, is loving yourself. So being vulnerable, being truly vulnerable requires, loving yourself and practicing self-love regularly. And it's important to introspect, but you don't want to beat yourself up necessarily. You want to be critical of yourself and ask yourself hard questions, but don't belittle yourself. That's an important part of this. And this really is kind of a tangent, and it could seriously be its own video, like self-love. And that was something I talked about again in the social media, why I deleted social media video. I was like, this is all part of me trying to learn to love myself more, basically, which might sound corny to some people, but I don't care, because it's true. Because social media was getting me to hate myself, and it was gross. And I do feel like I'm making some strides and getting closer, really knowing who I am and learning to love that person. But it takes time, and this is part of that process. I think that for a long time, have prided myself on being an authentic person, which is, first of all, being honest about what you love about yourself can be nerve-wracking, because by saying it and by expressing that, you open yourself up to critiques of that thing that you pride yourself on. So I think that it can feel a little unnatural to be like, I love this about myself, and be like, just, I'm glad that I do this thing. But again, practicing that self-love is so important, and it's important to actively do it, and actively remind yourself of good things and things you like about yourself. And that in itself will help you to get to know who you really are. This is just one man's approach, but I hope that it can resonate with other people. But then when I say I pride myself on being a genuine person, what does that really mean? What does being genuine mean to me? To me, it's number one, being honest, and so being honest with yourself, admitting when you're wrong, admitting when you're at fault, and staying true to what you believe, not changing the way you act around different people, is part of that honesty in my mind too. Obviously, you're gonna act a little different around your grandparents and your best friends. It can't be the same, but there's a difference between that and just becoming a whole different person when you're with different friend groups. So honesty, super important part of authenticity, mostly just being honest with yourself. And then, obviously vulnerability, like I talked about, I think is a really important part of, being genuine is being vulnerable. And then, lastly, just kindness, just be kind. And that's, a little vague and can be interpreted in a lot of ways, but I think that kindness is pretty universal for the most part. And I think it's just such an important part of being genuine too, is kind of goes back to intention, is why am I even asking this question of, am I authentic or am I an asshole? It's because I'm trying to learn how to be kind to myself and to other people. That's ultimately what all of this is for learning how to be a better person. So kindness is really key. And, you want to, or at least I always try to lead with that. and let that kind of guide my thinking. Obviously, that's easier said than done because we have natural inhibitions that kind of stop us from that. But yeah, once again, just important to always introspect without kind of, without taking a dump on yourself. So yeah, I think this is something I want to keep thinking about. And I think it's a lifelong journey to becoming authentic, because ultimately, once you are authentic, it means you know who you are. And I think that the definition of what being authentic is to you can change. One year you might think it's one thing, and the next year you might think it's another, a slightly different version of what you thought the previous year. Hopefully that's what the case is. Hopefully we're always growing, but yeah, it's a journey, and so is self-love, and so is really, all learning how to be honest and vulnerable, all of this stuff. And I don't have any of it dialed in, but I'm 20, so that's okay. And even if you're 60 and you don't have it dialed in, it's okay too, So yeah, let me know what you guys think of this, and if I should keep talking about this, and have a good weekend.